It could be like a lot of
Look at that hair.
Three plastics.
He's gonna be a killer when he's big.
Yeah, she sent me a list back and I was like,
couldn't do it.
15 different things. She's like,
I love
yeah,
it.
exactly. Three hostages.
Wherever we go, it's
Yeah,
always.
honestly, I might just mention it. Seriously, because she's like, it is no skin off her back. I'll just bring
Yeah, see, like, there's so they're usually in the evenings.
That was selling pasta. I was like, sure. Okay. She would go and read.
Will you send that to me?
Right.
All right, party leaders. We've got 2 left, and 17 really gets into the meat of this top of the pyramid, the behavior plan. We're getting into understanding the function of behavior, which is the why. We're going to get into the why of it. We're going to give special thanks to our Pyramid Plus funders, the Department of Human Services, the Division of Behavioral Health, the Division of Child Welfare, the Colorado Health Foundation, the Colorado Heal Foundation, Maya Health, Elswan. Without their work, you can see why we do need the funding to promote the message. So our agenda for this particular session is we're going to start off after our learning objectives with a video on perception. Just going to enlighten ourselves on our frame of mind when we go into this process. We're going to talk about assessing with universal practices. We're going to get really specific into, the term is FBA, but this functional behavior assessment. We're going to talk about the form and function of a behavior, what it means, how we identify it. We're going to create something called a behavior equation, and we're going to do an activity around that. We're going to talk a little bit, Vanessa's going to talk to you a little bit more about collecting data and some of the various ways that we can do that, and it's nice because you have a lot of options to personalize it to your situation, and we'll do an activity around that that builds on the activity you just did with your vignettes in session 16. We're going to wrap up by talking about a hypothesis statement and how we make one of those and how it kind of feeds into this process. And then we'll wrap up with our thought seeds and quality improvement. So what we hope that you will get out of this, like Vanessa's been saying, is not necessarily that you're going to go home tomorrow and start writing a behavior support plan, but you're at least aware of the process, you understand it, you can probably put into practice some of the steps, but it's just an awareness piece, if not an educational piece to launch future work. So we want to give you those tools on how to assess the use of universal practices that are going to get that challenging behavior reduced. We're going to talk about the importance of identifying the function of behavior. I think if you take one thing out of today, it's going to be this function of behavior. It's extremely important and it's very powerful in this predictability of the success of your plan going forward. We're going to talk about how to implement that functional behavior assessment by gathering information, and we're going to give you tools to use for doing it. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how we take all that information together and make it into a hypothesis. So our ground rules have been be on time, open communication, time for questions, and avoid side conversations. Anything you'd like to add? Jessica won't break the rules this time. So teasing. You guys are so good. You're so easy. The parking lot, we just added last session the speech milestones. If anything else comes up, feel free to let us know and we'll add it on. The handouts for today, there's a lot of really great handouts in here. Everyone has their session 17 packet. There's a lot of materials in here, but I think you'll find them really helpful, not only for you, but maybe something that you'd like to share with families. The first one, 17.1, is about positive behavior support and just kind of an overview that tells you what it is. If you end up doing it with families, it would be a great resource to share with them what the point of this whole process is. 17.2 is a handout on what children are trying to tell us. Again, another great little just quick read to remind us of what this process is, what we're doing with regard to their behavior. 17.3 is a really great article. I really think you'd like it, as well as parents. It's one of those ones, especially when you're dealing with the younger kiddos, it breaks it down into some really tangible examples, as well as breaking it down by age groups. So they break out the babies versus the little toddlers, and I think it's a really great article that you would want to share with families, like if you're a little biter, if you needed to intervene. it says 31 on the bottom, classroom profile for challenging behavior, and the one behind it is classroom practices assessment. We're going to touch a little bit on it in the presentation today, but if you'd like to see the full thing, it's right there. Let's see, what's this activity sheet? They're not numbered, so. 17.5 is the one called the sleep activity sheet. We're going to use this in an activity in just a minute. We're also going to use the ones behind it. 17.6 are the observation cards. Don't write on this one because I know your fondness for blank activity pages. So I've made copies for you to do the activity on the writing one, and this can be your saved one that you keep. There's also behind it, 17.7 is an ABC data sheet. We're going to use that too. And then a lot of blank materials after this. When we get into some of the data collection things, these are examples, but I think you guys might like to save them as blank copies. So you have a behavior incident report is one option. You have a behavior scatter plot. You have, this is a home observation card, something parents can use at home to collect data. We're going to use this framework. 17.7 is a support planning chart. We're going to use this framework, but you can keep this blank for your reference. There's a lot of goodies in here for you. The next one's a PTR behavior rating scale. Vanessa will get into showing you how to do that. This one's an infant toddler behavior review questionnaire that you can use. And we'll go through all these when we reference them in the handout. This one's a functional assessment interview form for a young child. That's 17.8. And we're almost at the end. As you can see, you have a lot of choices. And then identifying function of challenging behavior, another form you can use. There's a little article here at the end about prevent, teach, reinforce, just kind of a little summary, especially if you got into it with a family. You might want to share with them. It just kind of gives them information, and on the back it starts into the actual tool where it's got the question that you would go through. And that's multiple pages.
That's not good. I just maybe it's just because the numbering is kind of messed up.
I have after
I
that.
go
Yeah.
from 59.
That's it.
Okay.
The
So
center.
it's like I'm missing 62.
Oh,
It
okay.
goes to question 7.
62.
And then-
Are you missing one page?
Yeah, because
I think that's all I have as well.
65.
They just give you a piece of the.
Oh, so you don't have the whole.
There is a 62 and 63. Do you not have it?
I have
don't have
63.
no.
Oh, it is, and it's like,
Okay.
we just have the second. It's
Yeah, it was like
7, 8,
62
and
and
9, so
64.
we're missing,
You're
it's this
missing-
form. We're missing the front side of that.
It's on the back. Oh.
Yeah, and then it goes
Interesting.
from 61. I'm
Okay,
missing
then I will get you that one. Thank you
That's
for
odd,
catching
yeah.
that. Yeah, because it's multiple pages. The PTROIC, let's see,
Oh, okay. That's all.
17.8,
Maybe they
right,
just
17.8.
And 64 is missing too.
Yeah, I'll just redo that whole handout for you. so you
62
can
and all,
pull-
yeah.
So it's together correctly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for catching me. And then the last one's your thoughts. Lots of papers. But lots of good tools. I think you'll want to save those for your link. Okay. Feel free to keep eating, you guys know where the bathrooms are. Anything else logistically wise?
I noticed on the infant toddler review, it seems like it did the same thing with the numbering, so.
Maybe
It just did 51 and then 53, it's missing like 52, 50. Sorry.
I might have done a little squirrely copy job. Yeah, you're right. Why did it do
Well,
that?
and it went 41, 40,
Did it do this on all of them? Let me check.
35, 37, 39. It's like it's missing the odd numbers.
Let me just
Or
read,
even numbers.
I'll do, before we leave today, I'll just throw the whole step on the copier and we'll just give you. It looks like all the even numbers are missing. Thank you for catching that. So we'll just throw it on the copier before we leave today. Okay. Well, now you know what to look for when you get the right. All right, so as always, we're really starting from a place of evidence-based practices. We're focusing specifically on some practices that are developed in LEAP and PTRYC. What we want to stress the most to you today is this is not the place to start. If we tipped this over and you started on it, it wouldn't balance, right? It would be totally unstable and tip over. This is a building step. This is scaffolding. We're going to do all this work and we're only going to end up here when we need to. It's our last step, but it's the most intensive. And so in terms of creating this whole behavior support plan, these are the 6 steps. Today we're only focusing in this section on 3 and 4. So we'll talk about that functional behavior assessment and then we'll get into the hypothesis. We'll do the rest of the work in a couple weeks. So Benjamin Franklin said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I love this quote. The fact of the matter is, it's just as relevant for adults as it is for kids, right? And probably even more so that we get stuck into this rut of doing the same thing over and over with kids, getting the same outcome and being really frustrated with that same outcome when it isn't surprising that it continues to happen. All right, so we're going to watch a little video and then do an activity with it after. Let me turn the lights off. It has a self-explanation in it, so I won't brief you.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes.
Did you get that?
Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half
Did
missed the
anybody?
gorilla.
Yeah, I saw the grill. That's why I laughed.
I didn't see
If you
that at
filmed
all.
the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again.
How funny.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Oh my God.
When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Take it home though and show an adult.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
All right, so that really gets into our thinking on priming. So that video had you primed with a job, right? To just count the number of passes by the white. players. Can you see how that affects your ability to observe a situation? Because when they left you free and didn't give you a job or a task of counting, and you weren't focusing on one specific thing, what did you see? You see the gorilla.
It's all the curtain thing.
You see the curtain change. You see the person. You have a bigger viewpoint of it. But if our brains are primed to just see one thing and we're always looking for it, and if we translate that into working with kids with challenging behavior, if we're so focused on that one thing, the biting, we're just constantly focused on the biting, and we're perhaps not seeing the bigger picture of what's going on around that child, in the environment, what's happened before it, what's happening during, that we're maybe missing because we're so primed on that one thing. So if we're labeling kids, you're a biter, you're a runner, you're this, we're not seeing the child for their whole self and all the things that they have to offer, and we're not seeing that situation in what may be a wealth of information to help us solve that problem. But if we're just focused on that one activity, we might miss some really huge clues. How many of you actually saw the gorilla? Which is actually what they say about how some people do. But I'd seen the video.
Yeah, I knew there was going to be.
Yeah.
And I wasn't focusing on that.
Yeah, see, so when you're not focused on one particular thing. So, anyways, so the point of that is to be aware of those priming thoughts where you're really focused on just the one thing and we're not taking that bigger picture into example. It's also to be aware of those hot buttons like Vanessa was talking about earlier. If biting is kind of my thing, like I don't like to see it, and if I see it, I'm kind of hyper aware of it. Rather than some of the other things that don't really bother me as much. So be aware of how it affects your ability to perceive a situation. And then we're going to harp a lot on it, and I have a fun little activity for you, but really taking that emotional piece out of it and just looking at the situation as an objective person, and we're going to practice it a lot today. So one of the things that we're going to do when we get to this point is look at the PTRYC classroom profile, and when I get you the right ones, you'll have the whole copy, but those handouts are right there, and these are the 2 assessments. But when we find something's lacking, or we're having a behavior that we're seeing repeatedly that we need to look at more closely, one of the things we're going to do is go back and look at that bottom of the pyramid. And that's what this is going to help us do with our classroom, to just make sure that we have in place all those other supports with the environment, with our language, all the things that we need to be making sure are there to support kids. We want to make sure there's no gaps in them. So the classroom profile, it's not very long, it's just a little checklist, but if there's 2 things on that list, when you go through 2 or more, then there's something that's potentially deteriorating your ability to be successful with that kid. So we want to focus on finding out what it is and fixing those gaps. With the classroom-wide practices, it's another checklist with the longer sentences, but if there's anything in there that you answer no to, or even that you just can't emphatically say yes, then that's something to reevaluate and look at putting in place so that when we're working with this kid, you can say emphatically, yes, we are doing all of these things, and they're in place to support that child. So the functional behavior assessment is the main feature in creating a behavior support plan. It's that front-loading piece. We're going to do a lot of work, a lot of detective work today. And that is going to help us create this plan. So we're going to put all this effort into creating this functional behavior assessment so that we can easily create a behavior support plan and easily find success, or at least be set up for the most successful outcome. It's a process for gathering information about the behavior and the environment that are going to predict and maintain it. And the goal is to be able to let us make that really highly successful behavior support plan, because we're really honing in on what's the purpose and the function of behavior, and we're going to tweak it for that child. The process is really gathering information about the problem. We're going to look at, where does this problem happen? Where do we most likely see it? Is it during free play? Is it during circle time? Where do we not see it? Where does this behavior not happen? We're going to talk about what happens when it does happen. What's the consequence? Is there something good? Obviously, we've talked about kids keep doing it because it's working for them. What are they getting out of it that's making them continue to do this behavior? And then the major outcome, obviously, is the hypothesis that we're going to use to put into our behavior support plan. So if we're looking at the whole process, we're going to go through the records, we're going to go through those classroom profiles that we just talked about. We're going to definitely observe the child in these routines where we see them and where we don't. And maybe it's in different settings, maybe it's in the same place. We're going to collect data, and we're going to pull together that team that we were talking about assembling earlier. We're going to pull them together and create a functional behavior assessment together. This isn't meant to be something that you do all by yourself alone in a bubble, because like we've just been pointing out, more eyes, more perceptions, more experiences with this child in a variety of settings are going to give us a better, fuller picture in order to make the best possible case for what we're looking for to replace in terms of behavior. So we actually, when we come out of this FBA process, are going to end up with something that's just letters, and we call it A, B, C. But we're going to look at what is the child's behavior. Is it spitting? Is it hitting? What are we looking at? We're going to talk about what happens before that behavior occurs. So maybe like in Annie's example, the little person finds that they don't get what they wanted, and then they spit. And then what happens after we spit? What happens with his peers? What happens with the caregiver, the adults in the room? What happens in the situation environmentally? What happens? And then we're going to create a hypothesis of it. So the real crux of all the pyramid work is that behavior is communication. All behavior. Behavior we like, behavior we don't. It's all communication, and it's the only way, if you think about it, it's really the only way kids have to tell us what they need. Because sometimes some of the things they need are so complex. I mean, when we talk about kids with like sensory processing problems, we have no idea. Vanessa and I used to have this little guy who had a lot of problems going on. And when he would go outside, we have some bushes that are like butterfly bushes out there. He would launch himself into the bushes and scratch himself up and roll himself around. And it was really scary to watch, but he was telling us in a majorly big way that his body needed something, and he wasn't getting it, and we needed to figure out what it was and help him. So just when we take that emotional piece out of it, and we just realize that kids are trying to tell us something, and they don't always know what it is that they need for their body, for their mind, what kind of knowledge they want, but they're expressing it in just some way to get your attention, to tell you, help, I need something. So if we look at it that way, we know that we can understand their behavior a little bit better. And what we know is the form of the behavior is just surface stuff. It's just that telling you we need help. The form is how they're communicating. It's the whining. It's the yelling. It's the pushing, the hitting, the screaming. It might be that kid that withdraws or hides under the table. That's their form of communication. But what we want to get at is the function, the why. And it's only two things. It's only ever two things. To get something or get out of something. Every behavior can be boiled down into one of those two things. And it's our job to figure out what it is and help them find a new way to get that need met. So while we were talking about for that form, they might use words. That's a form of communication. They might point to things. They might, for a baby, catching your eye gaze is showing you that they're communicating with you. Pulling on the adult, their arm to take them somewhere. Crying, biting, tantrums, the bigger things that we're more well known for. But all of these things are ways that kids communicate with us. And they get really creative if you're not paying attention. They're going to step it up and find another way to tell you, this is not working for me. I need something. But the function of the communication is always either to get something or get out of something. So they might need an object, they need help asking for a toy, they might need your help as an adult. They might need help entering a play situation. They want to join in that group of play and they really don't know how to do it. We've had lots of kids that they just literally don't know how to play. It just doesn't come naturally to them and they need help. They might need more information where those visual schedules and things come in. They need the information to be able to participate. Maybe sensory stimulation, maybe it's too much, these bright lights, the classroom's too loud, your voice is too loud, maybe it's too quiet and they need more. I mean, there's a lot of things kids can be doing. They want to get out of a demand. You're telling them to put their plate in the trash. No, thank you, they don't want to do that. Escape an activity, it's time to sit down for circle time. No, thank you, I don't want to do that. Maybe there's a particular person, whether it's an adult, another friend in class, somebody that's just too much for them and they're trying to get away from that person or get out of interacting with that person. Same thing with the sensory stimulation. I mean, the list could go on and on. It could be anything, right? But it's our job to figure it out. There are some things that are limitations. It doesn't mean that the functional behavior plan isn't going to work, but it just means it might limit its effectiveness. This can include anything from like, maybe they're taking some medication and it has side effects, and so the side effects make them act a particular way. Maybe they have seizures. Maybe there's some other sort of neurological issue that's impacting their behavior, but isn't necessarily a function of trying to get out of something, if that makes sense. So sometimes you just don't even have enough observable information to make the assessment. Maybe you don't see them. I mean, Molly and I, we're only in the class for 2 hours with them, so our little window of opportunity is quite small compared to other people. So maybe it's just not available to gather that information. So there's some limitations, but on the whole, wildly successful. So this is the ultimate. We're going to add on to it, but this is the start of that functional behavior assessment. And it starts with the ABC, and we call it a behavior equation. So what triggered the thing to happen? What did happen? And what happened after? So the antecedent is the trigger. It can be something in the physical surrounding. It could be a social circumstance. Someone grabbed a toy out of their hand. You asked them to do something and they said they didn't want to do it. It could be something that's just a behavior of someone else and it just triggered their response. The behavior is the specific action that can be observed. And we really need to pay attention when we're making these between feeling words and descriptive words. Like Vanessa was saying before, feeling words. He was mad. He wanted control. He was sad. He was stubborn. He was grumpy. Those are just feeling words. We don't actually know that that's what the kid was feeling. We can surmise it, but what we really need to use are the descriptive words. He was standing stiff with his hands in a fist. He was growling. He was screaming. She was stomping her foot. She left the room. Those are facts. They're not based on somebody's emotions. They're not based on somebody's perceived perception of the situation. It's not negotiable. Nobody's going to argue with these words because they did it. These might be up for debate. So we're going to keep it very factual. The other thing is learned versus reflexive. Kids learn things like, I learned how to use a spoon. I learned how to hit someone. I learned how to pull their hair. Their behaviors that as they got older, they learned how to do. A reflexive behavior is just something like blinking or sneezing or breathing, or those aren't any body functions that you have any control over, right? But learning things are something different. And the consequence, of course, is what happens right after. So that one sheet that you have is labeled 17.5. It looks like a copy from a workbook, and it says
The ABC dash.
No.
It says activity sheet.
Yeah, activity sheet, this one. It's got a little picture of a book on it. Hopefully it has one. Thankfully, it's audio. Oh, Vanessa's doing it. Cool, thank you.
Oh, no, it's in there.
So all we're gonna do with this activity is, you can work in your little pairs, try out some new partnerships. If you'd like to move around the room, you can, but we're gonna take these 3 activities, and it's gonna be your job to come up with the antecedent. They've already filled in the behavior for you. You're gonna fill in the consequence. The type of consequence, and the prediction is whether or not you think that this behavior is going to happen again. So will the child continue to do that? So you can take a few minutes, and we will read through 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll share back at the end. Does anyone have any questions? All right, you're off.